Welcome to the Minnesota Rovers Tuesday evening presentation. Minnesota Rovers is an outdoors club based in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Our members organize trips that range from 1 hour to 2 weeks in Minnesota or further afield. Examples of our activities include hiking, biking, backpacking, skiing, snowshoeing, paddling, and rock climbing. We also organize conservation and trail clearing trips. Our members have experience and skills in many outdoor activities, so if you want to learn a new outdoor activity, we can probably help you. For more information, go to mnrovers.org. Now let's move on to this week's presentation.
Tonight you're here to hear from Marilynn about native plant landscaping. Marilynn spoke last October on how to prepare our landscapes in the fall and is back tonight to tell us more about the benefits of native plant landscaping. Marilynn has been the president of the Prairie Edge chapter of Wild Ones for the last 7 years and is very passionate about the topic. And so with that, I think I am going to stop sharing and turn it over to Marilynn.
Thank you for that introduction, Stacy. I'm delighted to be back today to talk about the importance of landscaping with native plants. Wild Ones is a national not-for-profit organization with chapters in most states east of the Mississippi, about 78 states all told. I'm president of the Prairie Edge chapter. We do most of our events in the Southwest Metro. The Twin Cities chapter is probably closer for most of you, and they meet at the Wood Lake Nature Center in Ridgefield. We have free monthly meetings, September through May, and free tours during the growing season. I'm going to do a quick review of last October's presentation and then move on to designing, installing, and maintaining your native planting. Please put any questions you have in the chat, or if you just really aren't understanding something, go ahead and interrupt me. I would definitely put Minnesota Rovers as a group of people who feel on a visceral level that they can't live without wild things. But in truth, no one can live without wild things to clean our air and water and to create healthy soil where we grow the food we eat. This presentation is about helping the wild things thrive where you live, work, and play. This is about landscaping for life. Because when we heal the earth by transforming our yards into prairies, rain gardens, woodlands, we are also healing ourselves. A native plant is one that has evolved in a region and formed codependencies and defenses with the insects of other animals. These are some of the topics that we covered in more detail last October, but it bears repeating. Native plants can improve soil health, control flooding, prevent erosion, purify water, replenish aquifers, and sequester carbon because of the vast networks of roots that can grow 15 feet or more into the soil. If you haven't already prepared your planting bed, there's still time to apply for a stewardship grant. The transformation of our yards from a source of carbon emissions and polluted runoff to one that sequesters carbon and replenishes groundwater is so important that there are many grants available from many cities, watersheds, and states. Minnesota has the Lawns to Legume program, which offers $350, and the application is practically no more than your name and address. You will be entered into a lottery, but if you don't win, you can apply. The next round, I think, starts in July. Where should you put your native plant garden? You can have a sunny center garden, border gardens, boulevard gardens, a shady rain garden, a sunny rain garden, and a soft landings or understory garden. Rain gardens are meant to absorb water down and replenish the aquifers. Water gardens are on the other hand, have a liner. So you can put fish in there. The water is meant to stay there permanently, whereas a rain garden is meant to have the water infiltrate within 48 hours. So just so you know the difference there. Some people have an obvious place to start. Invasive species harm the ecosystem in many ways. It's becoming more obvious that the sooner we can replant or at least reseed areas where we have removed invasive species, the easier it will be in the long run to keep the invasive plants from returning. The Minnesota DNR has a lot of information on invasive species, including aquatic ones and plants, animals, you name it. It can get a little overwhelming. So I kind of like this one. The Friends of Minnetonka Parks has put together great descriptions of 9 of the most common invasives in the tree and shrub category and 9 in the most common invasives in the annual, biennial, and perennial category. If you still don't know where to put your native plant gardens, one of the most critical areas you can convert is underneath the drip line. Underneath the drip line of a native tree or a tall shrub. For humans, trees are valuable because they provide shade, capture and absorb rainwater, store carbon, provide beauty. For birds looking to feed their chicks, native trees and shrubs are an all-you-can-eat buffet. Hundreds of species of caterpillars that are essential food for chicks spend part of their life in trees or shrubs. For many insects, the next stage of their life cycle is spent either in leaf litter or underground. Traditionally maintained lawn treated with chemicals and frequently mowed does not provide a safe haven for insects. To highlight their habitat value, we're starting to call these understory gardens soft landings. So if you might have gotten a head start last fall when I gave the beginning preparation, but if you're a procrastinator like me, it's not too late to prepare for planting this summer. Before I ask you to sheet mulch so that you could have in fall, so that you could have kind of almost 3 seasons of smothering any existing plant material, undesirable plant material, and composting it in place. But truthfully, I'm a procrastinator and I usually prepare my beds about a month before I'm planting them. So the only troublemakers are the dandelions because they store so much energy in their deep roots, and those I would really dig out. You still might not kill them all off, but they're going to be pretty spindly and really giving up the ghost. I went over this again in October, but just to know, you really need an initial layer of mulch. It holds down the paper, suppresses weeds, helps retain soil moisture, insulates the ground from extreme temperatures, and reduces soil compaction. So if you don't have a keystone tree or shrub, then by all means plant one. They're an excellent early season source of nectar and pollen for pollinators, as well as great habitat for butterfly and moth species. I used a Minneapolis zip code in the National Wildlife Federation Native Plant Finder to select a few keystone plant species for the metro. I list the plant name as well as the number of caterpillar species each plant supports. Noted conservationist Douglas Tallamy describes a keystone species as the backbone of local ecosystems in terms of producing food that feed insects. So everybody knows about the milkweed monarch relationship. Without milkweed, we don't have any monarchs because that's the only plant they evolved to eat. Well, that's true of about 90% of our insects. So if you enjoy seeing butterflies, please plant native. These are some of the common shade-tolerant keystone species that would be great for a soft landings garden, so they have something to eat up there. And then maybe you're supporting other butterflies and Lepidoptera in the understory garden. So you really want to study your landscape. You want to match the level of sun, soil, and moisture requirements of your yard with the plants you select. So cracking the code of plant labels. A good plant label is providing all the information you need to determine whether the plant will thrive in your planting bed. We're going to go over soil, moisture, and sun in more detail in the next few slides. But as you can see, black-eyed Susans, they're wonderful. They're highly versatile. They will thrive in most any type of soil, sand, clay, or loam, and any pretty good range of soil moisture, although I don't think I'd want to plant it in water. Sun exposure is how many hours of sunlight they need. And if they're not getting enough, they may not have the energy, the resources to bloom. They might survive. The hardiness zone in the metro is zone 4. And a note about being deer resistant. This does not mean a deer won't eat it. It just means that it's not a favorite food. It could be a bunny favorite though. So our strategy is to cage the new plants with chicken wire for a couple of years until the plants get well established. The native plants have continued to thrive despite being browsed on herds of buffalo, woolly mammoths, elk, you name it. Once established, these native plants will survive browsing by deer and bunnies just fine. So a little more about the types of different plants. You will often hear native plants that grow in full sun referred to as prairie plants. The center of our backyard, shown here, gets full sun. Native plants that grow well in the full shade are woodland plants. This little shade garden is on the east side of the house and under a maple tree as well. It gets very little direct sun once the tree is leafed out. Shown here are sedges, columbine, Jacob's ladder, and the blue blooms of woodland phlox. So you might think driving around suburbs that the only plant that can grow under a tree is a hosta, but hostas aren't native and there are a lot of beautiful flowers that do grow under trees. Native plants that dislike intense midday sun but grow well in the morning and late afternoon are savanna plants. Part sun or part shade plants usually work well on the east side of your house or under a tree that isn't surrounded by other trees. Soil type and moisture levels often go hand in hand. Typically, clay soils remain moist longer after a rain than sand does. Of course, you can have sandy soil that's also moist near a lake or a river. A shovel full of sandy soil resembles beach sand, although it might be darker. Sandy soil falls apart easily and is very coarse textured, allowing the water to infiltrate quickly. So often at the bottom of a rain garden, we don't usually recommend amending soil, but at the bottom of a rain garden, if you have heavy clay soil, you might need to amend it with leaf mulch and sand to help infiltrate. Everyone has spots in their yard that take longer to dry out. Maybe it's caused by drainage from impermeable surfaces or a natural depression in your yard. Maybe it's adjacent to a creek, pond, or wetland. Native plants all by themselves can alleviate standing water by helping it infiltrate into the soil through channels created by the deep roots. You just need to make sure you're selecting a plant that thrives in moist to wet soil, maybe even dry soil if it's a wet spot for a week and then in a drought it dries completely up. So there are plants that can adapt to that situation. So water that stands around for longer than 48 hours can be a mosquito breeding ground, and that's why rain gardens are meant to infiltrate the water much quicker than that. So this is a beautiful flower. It's a blue lobelia. It will grow in most soil types, sand, clay, loam. Soil moisture of medium means that this plant will tolerate an average amount of moisture, so it could perhaps grow most anywhere with full to part sun. The fact that it also tolerates moist soil means that it, might also work well at the bottom of a rain garden, next to a shoreline, or even where your yard has a natural shallow depression. You want to design your landscape so something is in bloom from late April until late October. You don't have to plant a fruit tree to get berries. This American spikenard is a shrub-like perennial. That means it grows from the ground up, but could be mistaken. Every year it grows from the ground up, but could be mistaken for a shrub. It's about 33 feet tall. Pardon me, 36 inches or 3 feet tall. And it's about 3 feet wide too. And it provides these gorgeous berries. The choke cherry, it's a large suckering shrub. That means it spreads by rhizomes underground, and it's likely to pop up and keep getting to be expand until it's a regular thicket. So it's not perfect for an urban lot, but if you're in the suburbs and you plant it in the right spot, you will really enjoy seeing the berries be gobbled up by the birds. Tom and I spent an afternoon with our binoculars, and Tom was able to get this shot of a juvenile robin. There were so many robins in the bush. It was just so fun to watch them do their acrobatics to reach the next berry. So a nativar is a cultivar of a native plant. The single quotation mark in cutesy names such as Pink Double Delight denotes the cultivar name. Now cultivars, they're not as good as a native plant because they only may provide some of the benefits of an unadulterated native plant species, or they may be devoid of pollen or nectar resources. They are clone plants without much genetic diversity, so they might not thrive in ours. They might, as happened when I was a traditional gardener, they tended to survive a year or two until things got really tough, and then they would die out. So the native plant ones, they've evolved to survive all the different stresses of Minnesota winter and summer can throw at them. So the other problem with buying from a traditional nursery supplier is that they may use herbicides and pesticides such as neonics that can harm bees. So if you haven't heard what neonics can do, you can start with a seed coated with neonics, and it grows, and that herbicide is still systemic to the entire plant. So if a bee happens to get nectar from that, it will go away feeling like it has the flu. And we all know when we have the flu, that's when we tend to not be able to make it to the grocery store. We maybe rely on partners to help us out. We are sick, and so that's what we're doing to our bees if we're, unfortunately, what we're doing to our bees if we're buying from traditional nurseries. Now, some are getting better. I know Bachman says that they don't use it on the plants that they grow themselves, but they're still importing a lot of plants from neighboring states, and it's a real problem. They don't use herbicide. They might be importing some harmful invasive insects. So it's kind of a real catch-22. That's why it's better to buy local and better to buy from native plant suppliers. So a variety of shrubs will provide valuable food throughout the growing season. Service berries taste sort of like blueberries, but to enjoy them, you will have to eat them quickly before the birds find them. Shrubs are also really easy to maintain. Grasses and sedges are an important source of seed and shelter for birds. Some are also caterpillar host plants. Most of our prairie grasses are warm season, but sedges look similar and can get a jump start in the spring because they tolerate cooler temperatures. Right now, even though the snow hasn't all melted from the yard, you can already see the sedges greening up right at the edge of the snow melt. So it's fun to see. So here's some plants that will thrive in full sun. You can see there's a large selection. They're beautiful. So hostas are, as I mentioned before, non-native and ubiquitous. The hundreds of Minnesota natives that thrive in the shade and spread easily. There are hundreds and they're very beautiful. People tolerate tall trees as a matter of course. Even some tall shrubs are allowable, but for some reason when flowers get taller than people, this is just going a step too far. So make your decision early on. You might think you can confine your tall plants, like I did, to the back of the border, but sooner or later they will volunteer in front, and it takes added maintenance that you may not want to take on to keep them confined to their place in the back of the border. I have native plants that grow 8 feet tall. Sometimes a native plant catalog will be rather coy about the expected height of a plant. For instance, Prairie Nursery lists the height of cup plant as 5 to 10 feet tall. So which is it going to be? That was always very amusing to me. As far as I've been able to tell, it just depends on how closely the conditions where you put it match the cup plant's ideal growing condition. And even that particular cup plant, because the one your neighbor bought at a different nursery has different genetics and might do it a little differently. So a lot of diversity going on. So how many plants do you need? Trees and shrubs need more space. You have to follow the suggested spacing on the plant tag. For flowers, grasses, and sedges, planting 1 plug per square foot is a good guideline. Now, remember I mentioned spikenard earlier, how it's about the size of a shrub, and so is wild blue indigo. So there's a couple of exceptions, but for the most part, if you put in 1 plug per square foot, you're in good shape. Some nurseries will go with 1 plant every 18 inches, trying to save you money, but in the long run, I think it sort of allows more weed introduction. You'll be happier if you can get more plants. One thing I wish I had done differently in my yard is to plant more grasses and sedges. They frame each flowering plant and give your place an eye to rest. Give your eye a place to rest. The seed heads also provide food for birds, as mentioned previously. So I just wanted to go over some planting tips. I volunteered with Great River Greening and other organizations, and it's kind of surprising to me that some people don't know how to put a plant in the ground. So one thing right away I would say is try to buy plugs and avoid gallon pots because of those deep 10, 15 feet roots I mentioned. Native plants really don't like growing in a pot that long. So plugs are basically little seedlings, and they often are not root bound. This one I'm showing you is root bound. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor. It doesn't look like it, but I've got the blue circle where it's root bound there. So what you want to do is release the root bound plugs like the one shown. So you want to use a knife and cut through those roots at the bottom so that they're encouraged to grow outwards and not keep circling the hole. So for trees and shrubs, it's the same principle. You want to look for saplings or bare root when available, because they tend to outpace woody plants that are grown in containers, because those roots, again, are going to have circled and circled in the pot, and you've got to cut through them anyway. So to put in any plant, basically, whether it's a tree or a little plant plug, you dig a hole twice as wide and a little bit deeper than your plant. You loosen the soil at the bottom and the sides if compacted. You place the plant plug level with the surrounding soil. Sorry, definitely time for a cough drop. Then you backfill the hole with soil and press firmly into place. So the idea is you want to get rid of big pockets of air, but you want to retain aerated soil. So press firmly, but don't stomp it. Plant 3 feet away from established roots, established trees and shrubs to avoid damaging those large roots. Water well approximately weekly, or even more often if it's a drought. Like the last couple of years, we've been supplemental watering only the new planting, and the rest is just done just fine. So, but it's those new plants, you got to get them established because the roots aren't that deep yet, so they can't access the moisture in the soil. So many people think that this is how a garden should look, but this garden is newly planted and nature is not static. Now, a cultivar might be static, or a plant from Europe or Asia or something designed in a lab, because it's not meant to seed. Whereas native plants, that's one of the primary ways they reproduce. So I know it doesn't look like the same garden because we redid our sidewalk, but it is the same one a few years later. The rain garden provides far more ecosystem services when it's mature. And as a bonus, we never had to add more mulch. There's plenty of leaf debris to keep the soil protected and moist. I want to talk a little bit about maintenance now. A volunteer in landscaping is a plant that just appears without human intervention. The volunteers might be an undesirable weed or a native plant. Often your native plants will self-seed to fill in your landscape, so learn to recognize the seedlings of native plants. We were enjoying a volunteer in our rain garden until a friend identified it as giant ragweed, shown here in the foreground in the red circle. And most people are aware ragweed puts out a lot of allergens in the air, so I did pull that even though it is native. So this is a butterfly milkweed plant. It's actually butterfly weed, but we're trying to make people aware it is in the milkweed family. It is a monarch host plant. It's a very beautiful plant. Our neighbors recognized this volunteer as a desirable plant and left it growing, even though it volunteered on the outside of their planting bed, and it became host. We didn't capture it all in this photographs, but we counted 8 monarch caterpillars on it. One of the differences between traditional gardening and landscaping for wildlife is that we leave leaves fall. We let the leaves fall into our native plantings. The leaves provide food, habitat, shelter, and eventually break down to improve the soil. Finally, they provide winter interest. So you can compare my neighbor's blank slate of snow to the plants in our yard to understand what we mean about winter interest. You will also note that we leave the cages on our new plants up all the year. If you're worried about a deer sticking his head inside the cage, You can crisscross sticks across the top to prevent the access for the deer. Hopefully they'll find other things to eat in your yard that are more fully established. The U.S. Forest Service provides this diagram. It's an excellent overview of things to consider when designing and maintaining your wildlife-friendly landscape. Don't be afraid to leave things a little messy is the biggest takeaway I get from this. I've been stashing logs and branches around my yard for insect habitat for years, and they're usually well hidden, but in the summer by the flowers and in the winter by snow. Everybody knows in the woods, when you turn over a log, you're going to get all sorts of unexpected surprises, and that's just food to help make, the ecosystem work, and we need to learn to provide that in our yards too. So maintenance in the spring. So it is really hard to sit on your hands this time of year and in the next month, but it's way too soon to be disturbing the leaf litter, because the bees and other fireflies, other things are still down there, hunkered down for the winter. They're waiting for there to be nectar. They're waiting for there to be food for them. And that is basically, I know dandelions are not native, not promoting dandelions, but it just coincidentally, when the dandelions are in bloom, you're going to see a lot more insects have emerged. The soil will be warm enough so that now you can begin to do your cleanup. And the soil gets to be about 55 to 60 when that happens. Leave 15 inches of the stem so that stem nesting bees will have a home to lay eggs in to survive the next winter. So these stems pictured here, they're not the ones that the bees overwintered in. They're the one next year bees will overwinter in too, or they may be the ones that, anyway, you need to leave the stems up for so many of our bees are stem nesting bees. So I wanted to just go over briefly a few things to avoid doing. And I've talked a lot about insects, and many people may know that we're kind of in an insect apocalypse right now. There's been a huge drop in the number of insects, and so many of our birds, reptiles, amphibians, fish, mammals coming out of hibernation, they depend on those insects. We have to foster insects. We have to protect the bugs. So 97% of our native insect species are beneficial and essential for a healthy ecosystem. So let's be kind to them. Synthetic fertilizers are harmful over the long term because they contain salts which poison the soil. Excess nutrients pollute water and release greenhouse gas emissions. Also, the plants have less reason to feed soil microbes that are the key to long-term carbon sequestration. So avoid excess tilling. This is a mistake I made as a beginner. We tilled up our turf grass, and now I could kick myself. I've learned that tilling, really composting that grass in place would have been the best option. Tilling is just disturbing the soil, killing off what microorganisms I did have, releasing carbon. Tilling isn't a good thing to do to soil. Large areas of bare soil are bad. If you have a garden bed that you leave bare all winter, like in the upper right corner, you are allowing the rain to compact that, to remove the air pockets. you're allowing extreme temperatures to affect it. So at the very least, cover it with your leaves. They make a great mulch. And finally, light pollution. I did this too. Another beginner mistake I made. I bought solar lights for my yard, so I could look at these beautiful, that winter interest all year and summer interest. And light pollution is really one of the things affecting the mating of insects. And everybody's seen, moths at a light and killing themselves. They can't help it. So where you can, especially in your backyards, try to reduce the amount of light. So these are ways to enhance, besides the things I've already mentioned. So where you do retain turf grass, mow at the highest height of at least 3 to 4 inches. Grass will then have slightly longer roots. Leave the leaves. I've talked about that before. So important. Don't buy more mulch. If you've got a bare spot, buy more native plants. That is my lesson for you. So educational signage and friendly conversations will help neighbors understand the benefits of native landscaping. Our neighbors have noticed an increase in the number of bird and butterfly visitors even to their yards since we began landscaping with native plants. So there has been wide acceptance. It always gives me great pleasure to see people stop and enjoy the flowers and read the signs. There are Wild Ones native plant sales around the metro, including the Prairie Edge chapter. We're featuring professionally grown plants from 3 nursery suppliers. 2 out of the 3, though, you have to pre-order the plants. So from Blazing Star Nurseries, you can be placing your orders now. From Natural Shore Technology, you can place them between May 1st and May 15th, and they will be delivered to the old Colonial Church, now the Meeting House Church in Edina. And most of the native plant nursery suppliers tend to be kind of an hour drive from the metro, so this is an easy way to bring plants here. There are other ways to pick up plants. There's Burnsville has their own native plant market. Audubon Society sponsors the Landscape Revival events at Oakdale and Shoreview, which brings many plant sales suppliers for one day in June. So finally, this is my resource page. There's lots of places to get extra information if I missed something. So thank you so much for listening. I want to thank my husband, Tom, wave hi, Tom, for all his help to make this something that is coherent and makes sense.
Well, thank you, Marilynn. We do have a question in the chat. Roger is wondering, do you have an app that you would recommend to identify the plants that are growing around his newly purchased home?
Yes, so iNaturalist is thought to be one of the best. It will not only give you an answer pretty quick, it will also have that answer sort of curated by experts in the field who will either back up or not the software's first guess. My husband and I also like to use Picture This, but in at least one example, they were very wrong. But it's very we thought it was a little more user-friendly, Picture This. So.
Marilynn, I have a question for you. You
Sure.
went through quite a few different places where people could get plants and talked about them coming to the former colonial church. If you would you be able to send me some of that, and we can forward it out to the e-group?
Okay, I'll try to put something together. That was just offhand the ones I know about.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, but I think,
Marilynn,
the Minnesota Horse Society might put something together, so I could try to do some digging.
Marilynn, this is Rob. I'm wondering, do you have some experience with sweetgrass, and what can you tell me about it for growing it here?
So Robin Kimmerer wrote a whole book on it. Is that what you're referring to?
No, I just want to grow some.
So Robin Kimmerer is a biologist and indigenous person who has studied native plants and sweetgrass from both perspectives. And she wrote a wonderful book called Braiding Sweetgrass. And after that, I had to have some for my yard. I have sort of hesitated to plant grasses that spread by rhizomes because I was so afraid that I really wouldn't be able to tell them from my turf grass. But braiding sweetgrass or sweetgrass is also known as vanilla sweetgrass. It smells sweet. It's very, very glossy. It's just beautiful. Ours has spread through, I forget how many plugs I put in. It maybe was only 3, and it spread over to quite a big area. And I have never caught anybody at it, but bunnies or something are keeping it trimmed to about the height of turf grass, ironically, but they're so glossy green. It's never had a chance to grow tall and get to seed, but I would recommend it. I think it would be very cool. Maybe we should try caging that and seeing if we can get some to go to seed.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
We have 2 questions in the chat, Marilynn. Are there any recommendations for treating lawns to make them green without all the chem lawn type places?
Yes. So I don't know what you all know about invasive jumping worms. So worms are not native to Minnesota at all. They were wiped out during the last glaciation 10,000 years ago, but reintroduced. And mostly they do good in our vegetable gardens. They do good in agricultural fields. They're harmful to woodlands. Well, now we've got a new thug on the block, and it's looks the same as your regular earthworm, and it's a jumping worm. And it looks the same, but it turns the soil. It totally destroys the leaf litter. Turns the soil, looks like coffee grounds. So normally I would say get compost. It could be from Home Depot. It could be what you made. Spread it all thickly over your, well, not thickly, but an inch or 2 deep across your turf grass. I have done that in the fall, kind of in stripes, and seen those stripes appear in the spring as darker green. So what you're doing is really healing the soil with compost, and what happens is the soil microorganisms, the ants, and yes, the earthworms. I don't have jumping worms, thank goodness. But that all mixes it in. So even if you were to do it in June, in a couple of weeks, you wouldn't know that you put anything, but it will be greener and healthier. And that's kind of a natural way to improve your soil without harmful chemicals that may contain salts.
Hi, this is Diane. Thank you. Do you mean just like bags of compost that you buy at the Home Depot? Or is there a
Right,
special
but
time?
the problem now is because of these invasive jumping worms, we just don't know. So my advice is to start now, save your compost,
Oh, okay.
make your own compost. It is just the safest way. And if you guys, how many in the group would you say make your own compost? People think of it as a very labor-intensive process, but we save our food scraps all winter. My husband makes a kind of an origami bag, kind of a funnel type thing out of newspaper, and we fill it up because compost should be like 75% brown stuff, which is paper and old leaves, things like that. And then green stuff, which could be like that fresh banana peel or your apple peel or what have you. So we never stir our compost. We just have two different bins, and one is the one we're adding to, and then the other one is the one that's cooking. And then in the spring, we'll spread the one that's cooked for a year, and we'll spread that all over the compost. So it's all over the yard. And I don't know if you've heard this, but compost are basically your food scraps that go to a landfill release methane, which is carbon, which is a heat capturing chemical 300 times more powerful than carbon, which is basically what is causing, global climate change. So food scraps thrown out release methane, whereas in your compost, yes, it does emit carbon, but it also helps. Pardon me?
Carbon dioxide.
Releases carbon dioxide, but you spread it in your yard, it's improving soil health and feeding those microorganisms that are the key to long-term carbon sequestration. So in the end, you're doing so much better. So if you don't compost, please do, or at least I think most people now have access to organics recycling, which I don't know of anybody on my block who does it, but a lot of us do compost.
Marilyn, there are two more questions in the chat here. Diane is wondering if you could tell us the name again for sweetgrass. Was there a name for it?
Excuse me. I'm getting over a cold and I'm losing my voice. So, gonna consult the book.
The Rob Kimmer book?
Unfortunately, the Robin Kimmerer book. Tom's looking it up. Vanilla Sweetgrass.
Oh, vanilla. Okay. Thank you.
I might have it here. This one's. Oh,
You want the Latin name?
is it the Latin name you're wanting?
I thought you mentioned one of the sweetgrasses that you said was really shiny, but I missed it.
And it's a long Latin name.
Okay.
I'm going to spell it for you, or maybe I'll type it in the chat. Can I do that?
You should be able
I
to.
don't think I can. I don't see the chat.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's HEIROCHLOE. So like Aero Chloe. Odorata, ODORATA.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then one last question here in the chat. Aslam is wondering if you could explain winter composting again. He says he's struggling with it not turning into mush.
So I think that's where our the genius idea of putting it in this paper bag. We got one of those compost bins from Hennepin County with a lid on it, with the holes in it. The idea is you don't want to have a lid that's not aerated because anaerobic bacteria is the smelly stuff. Aerobic bacteria does not smell. So we put it in that paper bag, and it's really the fungi that you want to be growing, not so much bacteria. Bacteria sound like you've got way too much of. So you're putting in way too much of the green stuff. You need to put in more. So like toilet paper rolls, paper towel rolls, newspaper. What else do we put in? What?
Egg cartons.
Oh yeah, most egg cartons are something you can put in. And by newspaper, I don't mean the ads that are very colorful. I mean the
Paper part.
black and white part. Yeah. So use more of that. If I think of it, I'll try to find a picture of how to make that. Basically, it's a liner for your whatever you put your compost in, and you can throw away your liner every time. And I don't know, for some reason we started getting the Star Trib on the weekends. We're not paying for it. So we have plenty of newspapers.
All right. Are there any last questions for Marilynn?
I was wondering if any of these plants can be started from seeds, where you just get the seeds, or do you?
So on the Wild Ones Prairie Edge website, we have Lori Trist, who is also a Minnesota Rovers. She is going to be our video blogger, and her first one was on winter seed sowing. There's two ways to do it. One is in kind of a miniature greenhouse that you make out of a translucent milk jug. And the other is kind of the lazy person's way to do it, which is what Tom and I demonstrated, which is just collecting the seeds in the fall and scattering it about the yard. It's like a 5-minute video on the Wild Ones Prairie Edge homepage, if you want to look that up. Starting from seed like now in a little container garden. Truthfully, I'm just not that good with growing plants from seed. I'm great with a plug. Don't have much luck with the seed. We'll see what happens with this seed sowing. I do know of a gentleman in Bloomington. Hats off to him. He had a hillside that was tiered, full of buckthorn. He managed to get rid of all the buckthorn without use of herbicide, planted everything from seed. We toured it. It was gorgeous. And, hats off to it. I don't know. I don't know. I do not have that good a luck from seed, but people do it. It's obviously an economical way if you've got a very large area, but I would use plugs where you can. They're really incredibly inexpensive. People think of, you go to buy a flower at a traditional nursery, it's in a fairly big pot, probably going to set you back $15, $20. Whereas native plants, you can buy a little 6-pack of plugs for like $10, $12. And you get 6 plants. Now the woodland plants, unfortunately, are more expensive and harder to find, but for a lot of your sunny prairie plants, 6 plants for, $10, $12. So.
Good deal.
Great. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you, Marilynn. We've got some people thanking you in the chat. Thank you for coming back and motivating us to do things outside in our yard.
Thanks for watching this Minnesota Rovers presentation. If you want to see more, please click on the link to our channel or the subscribe button below. Thank you.